My local Walmart is in Quincy, just outside of Boston. It's a short drive away, and up until about a week or so ago, I would make a weekly trip to the huge superstore to pick up groceries and cheap stationery items for school. After driving over, I parked my car and started making my way toward the main entrance. That was when I started hearing some jerk catcalling me from all the way across the lot. I'm not the most beautiful girl in the world, not by any stretch of the imagination, but I still get whistled and hollered at by half-drunk nobodies all the time. I just kept walking, totally ignoring their shouts and whistles. As I approached the Walmart, that's when I heard his footsteps. The guy who had been shouting at me had jogged the entire parking lot. I know, maybe that's not the most terrifying thing you've ever heard, but it really did have me on the verge of panic. What did this guy want? Why would he run all the way across the parking lot? Just to try and mac on me? Then this guy must be way more pathetic than I'd first thought. I don't deal well with conflict, so I was dreading having to tell him to back off in person. He then starts calling me by this other girl's name. My name is not Allie, but for some reason he kept calling me that over and over, kind of talking to me like he knew me or something. I told him that wasn't my name, but he just laughed like I was joking around. This is when I started to get super confused. I honestly couldn't tell if he was being serious or if this was some kind of weird prank or dare. When I finally told him to go away, he murmured something about seeing me around later. After a few days, I realized I'd forgotten to pick up a USB stick I needed for college. I was literally raging with myself because I figured the only reason I'd forgotten in the first place was because of that weird creep in the parking lot. They seemed harmless enough, sure, but I have to admit I was pretty rattled from the encounter. As I rolled into the parking lot again, I parked my car and looked around, this time making sure the gang of dudes wasn't hanging around or something. Unfortunately, like something right out of a bad movie, there they were hanging out in the exact same spot as before. Only this time, as I'm looking over, I happened to make eye contact with the same dude that had been bothering me the last time. I knew I messed up immediately. As you can guess, he came sprinting over in the same way he did the previous time, only this time he was distinctly more aggressive. He started calling me Allie again, but now he was accusing me of owing someone money. Like, a lot of money by the sounds of it. I told him to go screw off, but he got wicked mad at this point. He started cussing me out in front of everyone. I started shouting back a little, but like I said, I don't exactly do well with confrontation. I felt myself tearing up as he threw all kinds of insults at me, saying threats about how he'd get the money out of me no matter what, if it's the last thing he did. He only left me alone when in a shaking voice, I told him I was going to call the cops. I didn't go to the Walmart for a little while. I was freaked out by what was going on. I thought it was best to just avoid the place for the time being, and let this whole mistaken identity stuff die down. Maybe it really was just a big prank, but the guy had gotten so mad last time, it really didn't seem like he was playing around. When I was pretty sure all was blown over, I finally plucked up the courage to hit the Walmart again. If the guy was there and he got weird, this time I'd just call the cops right away. No getting upset in front of a crowd of strangers again. I drove through the parking lot slower this time, making sure the guy and his friends weren't still hanging around. There was nothing. No big group of creeps with a bottle or brown paper bags. I was safe. It felt so liberating to not have to look over my shoulder just going to the store. I practically jogged inside to grab more graph paper, treating myself to some cheap candy since I was in such a good mood. Still smiling, I exited the store, relieved the whole ordeal seemed to be over. I was wrong though. Somehow they must have seen me driving into the lot. There were so many of them outside. Guys, girls, many of them looking angry, some looking excited. It seemed they were gearing up for a public whooping. I've never known fear like that in all my life. All I wanted to do was run back into Walmart and hide. I was frozen on the spot. "Hey, where's my money?" One of the girls was livid with rage, bounding toward me with her hands balled into fists. She too kept calling me Allie. I hated that name so much, I never wanted to hear it again. The angry girl screeched about how I was dumb to think I could get away with robbing them, how I was a thieving little rat that was about to get what was coming to her. I tried to protest my innocence. They had gotten the wrong person, but all my pleas were drowned out. Phones were out and filming the crowd, expecting this screeching monster to start hitting me at any moment. I remember just closing my eyes and waiting for the blows to land, but they never did. Instead, a pair of arms threw themselves around me and pulled me away from the fray. A deep accented voice began barking at the thugs to stay away from me and how the cops had been called already and were on their way. It was the Walmart security guard, this big black guy. He'd seen the whole thing and jumped in before it was too late. He led me to the security office, away from the screaming mob, and waited with me until the cops came. I broke down almost immediately. It was the kind of ugly sobbing you can only imagine. I tried to say thank you, to tell him how grateful I was, but the words wouldn't come out. I just hugged him. He shushed me. As the cops dispersed the crowd, the state police detectives ended up visiting me at home a week or so later. They explained that the thugs in the Walmart parking lot had mistaken me for some addict who was indeed named Allie. Apparently, she was a lady of the night and part of some drug-dealing gang. She had disappeared a few months prior. When the detective showed me a photo of her, I immediately understood why they'd mistaken me for her. It was almost like she was my twin. The exact same brown eyes, same curly brown hair, even the way she smiled reminded me of myself. It was so spooky, seeing my doppelganger right there in the photo. They explained that she had robbed her coke-dealing boss and absconded with a large chunk of cash. She overdosed on fentanyl not long after she escaped though, and that's why the gang were convinced it was me. They hadn't seen or heard anything of Allie, and when they found me, I guess they just saw red. I sometimes think about that girl and wonder how all this came to be. How that trouble she'd caused would come to outlive her and end up hanging over my head. I work as part of the loss prevention team at my local Walmart. No, I'm not saying where, because I don't want to lose my job. I really need the money. The incidents I'm about to tell you about actually made national news too, and with the loss prevention team being so small, this story could easily be traced back to me. I hate my job. Yeah, I know I literally just said I needed it, but that doesn't mean that I have to love it. I don't like spying on people, but that's unfortunately the entirety of what the job entails. Wandering around the aisles, staring at the CCTV, watching for anyone walking too fast or acting too nervous. It can get really boring sometimes. Sure, there is a little action every now and then. Some people try to steal a DVD player or something. We get to play cops and robbers for half an hour until the real police show up. Half the time, it's just some young, dumb addict breaking down in our office, telling us she never wanted to be this way. Yeah, I didn't doubt it. No one did. That's not even the half of it, though. You know how angry a lone black person can feel when they think you're following them around the store? I've been called racist more times than I can remember. I'm not, though. I'm just doing the job I have to do. I hate so much having to follow people around. It still sucks, though. You can really see the worst in people working in loss prevention. The weirdest thing I ever saw while working for Walmart, though, wasn't some junkie or a thief or an armed robber or anything like that. It was something else entirely. So, this guy comes walking in through the doors one afternoon. Nothing particularly unusual about him. Nothing to give us loss prevention guys any suspicion at all. I took my eye off him for a little while patrolling the store. as it was my turn to do so, instead of watching the cameras. Honestly, I sort of forgot about the guy. I try to take note of the little details, but when you do it with so many people, someone so ordinary doesn't really stay in your mind. Usually they have to look particularly shady or something. I wandered back around toward the meat aisle, casually keeping an eye on various shoppers, when I saw this normal-looking guy again. He was balding and had a blue shirt on. He was just standing there checking out all the steak chops and cutlets, sitting in the fridge units. Again, nothing unusual. But here's where it started to get weird. As I was walking past the dude, his head sort of snapped toward me. I remember he had these light-colored eyes, but they looked almost empty. I said hello and greeted the man. He had this big wide smile that stretched all the way across his face, and as he opened his mouth he had no teeth at all. Not a single tooth remained in this guy's head, just 2 rows of diseased gums. I had to stop myself from physically recoiling. I tried not to react. I felt a bit sad for him. Maybe he had lost his dentures or something. I wouldn't judge him if he had. I do another loop of the store, watching families try to rein in their screaming kids, as impatient singles cut in their direction. I thought about how much I wanted kids myself, even if they can be rascals. It's something my mind wandered to quite often when I was bored on the job. As I'm coming back toward the meat aisle, though, something immediately struck me as abnormal. The blue shirt, balding guy was still looking at the meat, only this time, he was not just looking at all the meat. He was staring at it. It's hard to describe. It was almost like one steak in particular had really caught his eye or something. They weren't darting around like they had before. They were just kind of staring beyond. This time, when I walked past him, he didn't even acknowledge me. He didn't even move. He was just frozen, staring down into the fridge units with this dead look in his eyes. I don't even think he was blinking, honestly. I watched him for a good few seconds after. This guy, something was weird here. I decided not to take my usual loop around the store again. Instead, I stopped by the end of the meat aisle, watching this guy slyly out of the corner of my eye. He didn't move a single inch. It was almost like he was one of those street mimes. The people that pretend to be a statue or something. Normal people never really stand completely still. Even when they're not moving, they fidget, shift their weight from one foot to the other, take an idle breath, blink a bunch of times. This guy was still as a statue. Something was wrong with him. I called it in on the radio, asking a coworker about the balding man in the meat aisle. Was he known to the loss prevention team? It came back negative, though. The guy I was working with that day had never seen our toothless friend before in his life. As I'm watching this guy, still listening to my buddy on the radio, this toothless man just reaches into the meat fridge and picks up a large sirloin steak, still packed away in the plastic. I started feeling like an idiot. Maybe this guy just liked to take a real long time selecting the right piece of meat. He was toothless after all. Maybe he needed something special for his dentures. He brings the steak up to his nose, taking a deep long whiff of this thing to the plastic wrapper. Now I could tell this guy was obviously nuts. I know the crazy kids when I see them, and this was classic crazy. Still though, it's not like he was stealing anything. Technically, he was not even doing anything wrong. Being a little nutty isn't exactly against the law. Then though, he ripped off the plastic wrapping. That was my cue to step in. Only when I saw what he was doing with the newly unwrapped steak, I stopped in my tracks. The toothless man stuffed the whole raw steak into his mouth, straining his jaws. He began to mush the thick piece of meat up with his bare gums. I was stunned. It was literally the last thing I expected a guy with no teeth to do. I thought he was going to stuff it down his pants or something. I mean, I've seen shoplifters stealing weirder stuff and hiding it in weirder places, but to see him shove an entire steak down his lips and start chewing, it was the freakiest thing I'd ever seen. His eyes started rolling back into their sockets. His cheeks caved in as he started trying to suck all the fluids out of the raw piece of meat. The noises he made, good God. They scared the life out of me. It was like a weird moaning, like he was getting off trying to swallow the entire piece of steak whole. More and more was stuffed into his mouth. I watched him spit the meat out, panting and gasping for air. I rounded the corner of the aisle, actually terrified at this point that he would see me, as the sole witness of what he had just done. I waited, having somehow managed to freak myself out watching that weirdo. He escaped from the meat aisle with his back to me. As he walked quickly toward the main exit, I know I should have stopped him. It was my job to, but we're trained to keep our distance from offenders we deem violent or unhinged. I was gonna let the cops deal with this one. Now, every part of me wanted to know why he'd done something like that, why his teeth were missing. What kind of person was he that he couldn't be trusted with his own teeth? The cops picked the guy up eventually. Turned out he was a mental patient off his meds. Old guy too. He'd probably lost his teeth through simple lack of care. I mean, that's what they thought. Whatever was wrong with this guy though, he certainly had previous convictions for retail theft. The cop we spoke with said it was his 4th offense, and he was likely headed to prison for reoffending. I wondered how a guy like that would handle prison anyway. I don't know if you guys will find this particular story that scary. Maybe it's just gross or a bit sad. A poor old guy losing his mind in the middle of the store. Either way though, it's definitely the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me working for Walmart. In October of 2017, I managed to land myself a part-time job at my local Walmart here in Thornton, Colorado. It's a fairly large suburb of Denver. It's many things, close-knit, homely, but it's hardly the most exciting place in the world. I think that's why Halloween is one of my favorite times of the year. We take the holiday pretty seriously. So the anticipation and build-up to the spookiest night in the calendar is really something to look forward to. The majority of work at Walmart during that time of year involves sorting and arranging displays for all of the novelty Halloween products. You know, those ones that are stocked only during October. It was hard work, sure, but getting to mess around with all kinds of masks, costumes, and ghoulish accessories was actually really fun. Even if it did cause our grumpy old supervisor to glare at us every now and then. Halloween came and went, but I found myself kind of enjoying working at Walmart. I know that sounds pretty crazy. The customers can be awful, the hours are pretty long too, but I had grown close to all my coworkers there. There were even one or two I would go so far as to call good friends. Naturally, when one of the store managers asked if I wanted to extend my contract into the new year, I jumped at the chance. It would be one of the biggest mistakes in my life. So far, the morning of November 1st, 2017 was a gray one. One of those mornings where the world couldn't be any less inviting. All I wanted to do was crawl back into bed and sleep the day away. Still though, I dragged myself into the shower, washing away all the cobwebs and preparing to face the day head on. I was due for a shift from 10:30 until 6:30 that evening. I hated the longer weekday shifts. They had a tendency to drag on, but the thought of getting a cup of coffee from my coworker Teresa, who happened to make the best flat white this side of the Rockies, spurred me on to make it to work on time. Of course, I was right in the end. The day dragged on so bad I thought I was going to go crazy. Part-time weekend shifts were quite busy, but at least the activity made the time fly by. Spending hours at a time counting boxes of merchandise as part of some pointless groundwork is enough to make your brain congeal. By the time 6 p.m. rolled around, I was about ready to give in. There was so little time left on the clock. I found myself watching the minutes roll by, wandering around the store and pretending to look busy. I saw my friend Miguel hanging around near the front desk and struck up a casual conversation with him. in an effort to kill another few minutes. That's when I saw him. I'd like to think I'm not an overly judgmental person, but this guy gave me the creeps right away. He was dressed normal enough, black leather jacket, a reddish shirt, but it was the man's face that drew my eyes away from Miguel. It caused a nervous feeling to run through me. He was so pale, he looked sickly. His cheeks were gaunt, and his eyes were ringed by deep black circles, sunken back into their sockets. It almost looked like he had a raw skull, with nothing but a thin layer of flesh to disguise him. Miguel must have noticed the look on my face, because he too turned to look at this guy. I suppose it was for the best I reacted that way to seeing him. I think it might have saved both our lives when I look back on it now. It's like time slowed down for minutes. I know that's like a super cliche thing you only find in movies, but now I think there's some kind of truth to it. I remember every little movement, every single detail. The way his jacket was a few sizes too big for him. He almost looked silly as he reached into the inside of his pocket. I remember the way the polish of his handgun seemed to glint in the bright artificial light of the store. I watched as the man looked around for a second or two, scanning the shop floor for his first victim, before he raised his pistol and started firing. I was completely and utterly horrified. I would come to understand then that there are 3 common reactions to a sudden rush of fear, the first 2 being the well-known fight-or-flight responses. But there's also another one that's equally common, and no one ever seems to talk about it: total shutdown. Unfortunately, that's what I experienced. The deafening bang of the first pistol shot echoed around the building. An unsuspecting customer collapsed to the floor, an older man, dragging a shopping cart down with him, spilling the contents out as he lay bleeding on the ground. I couldn't move. I was frozen to the spot. I had never seen anyone get shot before. I'd only ever heard a gun fired like once. I could feel my body trembling, but I couldn't bring myself to flee. A horrific scene of violence was unfolding before us. Thankfully, Miguel did not have the same reaction. He grabbed my arm so hard it left a bruise in the shape of his hand, and dragged me behind a display of kitchen appliances to take cover from the shooter. All I could do was clutch onto him and pray the shots would stop. They didn't. Over and over again, the skull-faced man fired at staff and customers alike. I remember hearing this horrible cracking sound right next to us as we crouched behind the heavy appliances. I would later learn this was the sound of pieces of lead breaking the sound barrier as they traveled within just inches of us. The thought of it makes me feel sick even today. Suddenly, Miguel was pulling me by the arm again as we rushed toward one of the emergency exits that lined the shop floor. Shots were still ringing out as Miguel crashed into the metal bar that opens the door. I could still hear the pop of bullets behind us as we spilled out into the freezing Colorado night. Before us were 2 young children, maybe only 7 or 8 years old. They were crying and asking for their dad. The poor things had no idea what was going on inside, only that a bad thing was happening and they couldn't find their father. We tried to comfort them for a few moments, while the sound of police sirens grew louder and louder. Eventually, the parking lot was awash with blue flashing lights of cop cars and other emergency vehicles. We did reunite the kids with their father, and he openly wept as he thanked us for finding his children. Miguel was struggling to hold back tears, but I had completely broken down by that point. Many people had in the aftermath of this shooting. A 48-year-old man named Scott Ostrom was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Ostrom was handed 3 life sentences for the 3 people he'd shot and killed, plus 48 years for the other victims that were lucky enough to have survived. During the sentencing, the presiding judge said the killer had a black and malignant heart, fatally bent on spreading fear, misery, and death. It was also brought up that Ostrom's sisters said he had never been the same since trying LSD in the 80s. No other motives were given for his crimes. I quit my job at Walmart and went to therapy for a while after the shootings. I felt a lot of survivor's guilt at first, wondering why Ostrom hadn't chosen me as his first victim. Why did those other people have to suffer the way they did when I was right there? They suffered while people like me got to walk away unscathed. Mostly, I just thank God Miguel was there to save my life. Life is a very precious and fragile thing that can be snuffed out in an instant, so I try to live life as full as I can now. If not for myself, then for the people who were innocently shopping that day, unaware they would never see their loved ones again. So I'm a 23-year-old female, and I live on my own. I just moved out to the area for school, and I went to my local Walmart to gather some supplies for cleaning. As I walked inside, I took note of an older man near the entrance that I briefly made eye contact with. I nodded at him and kept on walking. I looked at folders for a bit, then made my way toward the electronics section at the back of the store to go and look for a charger. I was making my way through the aisles on the way down, looking at all the fall decorations. A lot of them were more geared towards kids, so I just glanced at them quickly, then turned around to leave. As I did so, I noticed the same man as before was right there behind me. I hadn't heard him walking through the aisle. He was holding and inspecting some paper plates with childish Halloween designs on them, clearly for kids. I thought that was a bit strange, but I brushed it off, thinking perhaps he had some grandkids or something. I laughed and made my way to the electronics section as planned, where they kept the chargers locked behind these glass doors. I was there for about 7 to 8 minutes when the same old man showed back up. Now, at this point, I was pretty far from where I'd last seen him. I saw in the reflection of the glass that he was clearly checking out my ass as he walked by. I brushed it off because I was used to men making quick glances like that in public. I left it at that. He was looking at the display behind me, on the other side. I went to leave, and this is where it got creepy. He suddenly stood right behind me and started aggressively eyeing me up and down, licking his lips, paying particular attention to my backside and legs. He was basically undressing me with his eyes. At this point, he was giving off massive creep vibes. I started shaking with adrenaline. I was really afraid of this guy. I thought he was going to try and grab me. I stayed calm, though, despite my throat feeling like it had a ball in it. I waited for him to leave. He did. I then went to a random nearby general part of the store. I noticed there were 2 men near the electronics counter. I wanted to stay near them, just in case something went wrong. I waited for a few minutes, just standing there next to him to see if the man would show back up. I wanted to confirm if he really was following me around or not. Sure enough, a scant 5 minutes later, he was already back. I caught him quite literally speed-walking down the main walkway, looking down each aisle as if he was frantically searching for me. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw I'd noticed him, then promptly scurried off into nowhere. I informed the workers that I was indeed being followed and that I really wasn't comfortable. I asked if there was any nearby security. They told me they didn't have any, just the loss prevention team. They offered to check me out there or accompany me to finish my shopping. They were both very kind, and I did actually take them up on the offer to get my cleaning supplies nearby. As we turned together down the aisle, the same man was standing further away, still staring at me. All he'd done was increase the radius he was using to follow me, now watching me from the front registers. I got my stuff and checked out. Then I weaved through all the different clothing sections to leave from a different area than the one I'd originally entered in. I didn't see him at all that whole time. I got back to my car and promptly drove back to my new place. I stopped about halfway at a random neighborhood though and pretended that was my house, just to see if anyone had tailed me. I didn't want the guy finding out where I lived, needless to say. When I didn't see him around, I drove home. Maybe I was overreacting a bit, but this area is new to me, and I'd never had someone be that openly creepy and persistent in following me. I've done things on my own plenty of times, and I've never had an issue like that before. This all happened in the middle of the day at 3 p.m. too. I was just wearing loose clothing. I wanted to make a quick trip in and out. I have no idea what could have happened if I didn't notice him, or what his intentions might have been for me. Was he just a looker, or did he want to grab me? I can't imagine they were anything good. If he'd followed me to my new place, who knows what could have happened. Either way, the whole encounter was really scary. He had no clue that I'd seen his reflection checking me out that time, and that nasty expression on his face. Just stay aware, you guys, and watch yourselves. One night when I was 17 years old, I was clothes shopping at Walmart. I was trying to get on a couple of pairs of jeans in the fitting room. After I'd tried on the first pair, I walked out of the fitting room and walked a little bit around the clothing department, to try and break them in a bit. I switched back into my other pants and bought 3 pairs of the jeans I had tried on. I went to go to the checkout, and when I got to the self-checkout area, I noticed there was this guy staring at me. He looked to be in his early 40s or so. He was tall too, about 6'3", and real skinny. He had short black hair, and he had this creepy grin on his face. He looked like a demon straight out from hell. I tried not to pay attention to him though. I checked out and went out to my car. I drove home in relative peace. 2 hours later though, at 11:30 p.m., I got a text from an unknown number. The text said this: "Hey, did you see me at the self-checkout at Walmart a couple hours ago?" I asked who it was, and another text came in immediately. It was the same guy that was staring at me at the self-checkout. I texted him back, asking him, "Oh, hey, where did you get my number from?" He said he'd seen it in my open wallet while I was in the fitting room, and that he just wanted to say hello to me. As you can imagine, I was pretty damn creeped out by this. I was just like, yeah, alright then. He said he wanted to get to know me because I seemed so cool to him. He even sent me another text saying those jeans I was wearing made my butt look so hot. He asked me to send him a picture of myself in my underwear. Obviously, I was disgusted. I told him I was only 17 years old. "That's alright. I'm really into people your age. Just send me one picture of you in your underwear." I told him no, and that he shouldn't be flirting with minors. He told me that he was gay anyway, and to send him a picture of me naked. I told him to go fuck himself, and told him he was a pervert for asking a 17-year-old for such things. The man then said he knew where I lived, and that he would come to my house and strangle me to death if I didn't send him any photos of me naked. I went to go show the text to my mother. When she saw all of these things he was saying, she was furious. She jumped in the car and drove to the police station to file a report. We showed them the messages, and they printed them off as evidence. They tracked the guy's phone number, and it was confirmed to be the exact same man who'd given me that devilish grin at the self-checkout at Walmart. The police came back and told us he was a registered sex offender and pedophile, and was also wanted for the abduction of a 9-year-old girl. Long story short, the guy ended up getting arrested. Both me and my mom were very relieved when he was, and we never did see him again after that night. My name is Samantha. I'm 20 years old and work at a Walmart by a small town named Jackson in Alabama. Since I don't go to school full-time, my boss would oftentimes put me on an overnight shift. This happened back when the store was open 24 hours a day. Given that it was a supercenter, there would still be a number of employees working my shift. This one particular night, I got a 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, and I was one of the only couple of employees doing stock work there. There was 1 or 2 other employees at the registers up front. Given that our store sits in the countryside of Alabama, we didn't exactly get much business at these insane hours of the night. It was, however, a prime restocking period. I didn't personally know the other employees working that night, but it's not like we'd run into each other in this gigantic store anyway. I started my night off folding pants in the men's department and generally tidying up the place. I kept headphones in at night because usually there would be no one to tell me to take them out. At that time, a customer wandered into the jeans section. It was around 11:30 p.m. or so it wasn't really that weird. People would still come in every now and then and close shop, usually until around midnight or so. The customer came up to me and asked me if we had any more of the specific pair of pants he'd found in a different waist size. I apologized and told him only whatever was on the rack was available. He thanked me and walked away. I made accidental eye contact with him as soon as he stood by the rack putting the jeans back. It was kind of awkward, and he just walked away. I simply continued on with my work. Some time passed by, and the store started to look like a complete ghost town. There was no one to be seen as far as the eye could see. I think it was about 1 a.m. or so. I made my way over to the appliances section. I was doing a lot of back and forth work with boxes from the back. It was the area where we kept all the items that were yet to go out. I brought a wagon full of boxes to one of the aisles and started to restock the shelves. Because the shelves were relatively empty at this time of night though, I was able to look through and see someone in the next aisle over. I could tell they were watching me. Well, that was up until he'd noticed me notice him, and then he looked away. His eyes looked really familiar though. I stepped closer to get a better view and realized it was the exact same customer from 2 hours earlier. How in the world could this guy still be in the store? Without making it obvious, I took the wagon with me and passed the next aisle over just to get a good look and see if the man had any items in his hands or something. His hands were completely empty. No way he could still be shopping for 2 hours and not pick up a single thing. Something obviously wasn't right here. I quickly finished up restocking the shelf with coffee machines and other appliances, then brought the empty wagon to the back area. I chilled out in there for a while because, quite frankly, I felt like that guy may have been following me or watching me longer than I'd realized. I played on my phone for a little while in the employee lounge. I figured it was about time to get back to work though, and decided I would do some grocery work instead, just to be in a different part of the store. I went into the dairy cooler and filled a bunch of crates with dairy products like milk and yogurt. This took a lot of time to do because I had to individually check the dates on each product and such. Over the loud sound of the giant refrigerators keeping the cooler cold, I heard the door to the dairy cooler burst open. There was conveniently a gap in the boxes sitting on one of the pallets that allowed me to peek through to the door of the cooler. I shit you not, it was that same customer. I ran to cover under one of the shelves and pushed a big box of eggs in front of me. I didn't really have to worry about making noise because the refrigerators were so loud on their own. For anyone wondering why I decided to hide, well, I already assumed this guy was hanging around the store watching me. Seeing him in the employees only section, never mind that, coming into the dairy cooler, seemingly something bad was definitely about to go down. I hid behind that box with my head down for the longest time, expecting to hear the doors of the cooler open and close. Eventually, after a while of hiding and not hearing anything, I assumed maybe he'd left. I lifted my head from my arms for the first time and looked up in front of the box. I screamed. He was right there, smiling at me, standing over me. His smile vanished as soon as I started to scream. He tried putting his hands over my lips to muffle my noise, but I didn't allow that to go any further. I pushed the box of eggs over right onto him. The eggs fell to the floor and made him step back, looking down at his shoes. I ran right past him, but he didn't attempt to grab me. I continued to run until I found another stock worker and told him to help me. The employee's name was Bob. I remember from his name tag. Suddenly, the man from the dairy cooler came up to the two of us and apologized, explaining he was from corporate and was coming to make sure everything was running smoothly. He said he didn't mean to scare me and was simply checking up on me in the dairy cooler to make sure I wasn't slacking off. This Bob guy seemed to really believe it all, but then again, he didn't seem a very smart sort. I asked the man then why he'd put his hand over my mouth. He said he was trying to avoid making a scene. Then he shockingly gave me the order to finish up the appliance section and disappeared as he speed-walked away down the aisle. Before he left though, I called out, "What's your name then?" He called back Tom. Just like that, he was gone. The next day I called one of the managers and asked if there was supposed to be a visit from corporate that night and if a creepy man named Tom sounded familiar. My manager, Margaret, said it sounded like complete horse shit. There was no record of anyone from corporate named Tom who was supposed to come visit that night, nor would anyone from corporate ever be in the store at 2 a.m. They went ahead and checked the camera footage. A police report was filed when they realized this was a random man. The cameras proved this man had been stalking me between the aisles for the better part of the first few hours of my shift. I told Margaret I couldn't do night shifts anymore after that, and she understood. I still worked there, but more so as a day stock person or a cashier now. So I'm a 39-year-old woman now, but this happened when I was 12 years old. My brother and I were in the CD aisle, and I had bent over to tie my shoes. My little brother then started laughing out of nowhere. He was only 9 years old at the time. When I asked him what was so funny, he quietly said that a guy was looking at my butt. I tried to check without being too obvious, and there was this old man with a long gray beard with a braid down the middle of it. I punched my little brother playfully, and we started joking back and forth. Who was gonna be his wife then? That sort of thing. My brother went and joined my parents, and they just kinda left me alone to do my own thing. So, to the beauty aisle I went. Within seconds, the same guy as before appeared in the same aisle as me. I went to a different aisle again, feeling this guy was following me. There he was yet again, pretending to look at stuff, but moving closer towards me. I went to another aisle, one that most guys would never go to. That was the pads aisle. Once again, this creep was pretending to look at pads and tampons. As he slowly approached me, I moved over to the next aisle once more, and then ran to go find my mom once he followed me again. I told her what was happening, so she followed me there. She told me to clear my throat if I happened to see him. Sure enough, this time he got so close to me, to the point where he could almost grab me. I started clearing my throat rapidly until I began to actually cough. My mom grabbed me now that she'd seen the man, and we found a manager. Walmart really dropped the ball though, because the manager acted like this guy didn't actually do anything wrong, and they couldn't do anything about it. Yeah, thanks so much, Walmart. I really wish I could say I never saw him again, but that's not the case. I remember seeing this guy every time I went into Walmart from then on. I was always watching my back, trying to look out for this pervert. Anyways, let's skip ahead a bit. I ended up being at a friend's house when I was 16. When her friend's dad came over, lo and behold, there he was, same braid right in the middle of his beard and everything. He introduced himself to me as Butch. As soon as we were out of earshot, I flipped out, telling my friend that was the same creepy guy who'd been following me around Walmart when I was 12. She said she wasn't surprised at all. She didn't really seem affected either. Yeah, sometimes she really wasn't the greatest of friends. One day when we were hanging out, she acted like we were going to see someone really cool and awesome. In my little mind, I thought she knew someone single to introduce me to. So we go knock on the door to this house, and this rather manly-looking woman answered the door. She then let us in and brought us cold Cokes from the fridge. There he was, Butch. He came strutting into the room, and made me so uncomfortable I wanted to throw up immediately. Things then took a really disgusting turn. They started telling us about how he wanted to see us naked and take pictures of us enjoying each other's body. As you can imagine, that was a very uncomfortable hour of saying hell no and being angry as hell. My friend had brought us into this situation. She never brought me around him again, but years later, her mother-in-law was actually dating him, and she allowed her kids to spend the night around this sick fuck. Yeah, my friend and her family definitely weren't the smartest or the best people. It gets even worse. Years later, pictures were found belonging to Butch of lots of little kids. Yes, it's exactly what you're thinking. Non-innocent pictures, but very bad ones, showing what a monster Butch truly was. Her mother-in-law had apparently even taken some of the pictures herself. Luckily, someone ratted them out, and both of them went to jail. The mother-in-law and Butch both became registered sex offenders, but she was released after just 6 months. Didn't really surprise me though, as much as it should have been more. Butch was put in prison for child porn, amongst other very horrible crimes involving children. He went away for a long time, and he ended up getting killed there. Thank God. I sleep much easier now, knowing there's one less disgusting pedophile living on this earth and harming children. So, this story is actually pretty short in comparison to some of the others I've heard, but honestly, I consider that a good thing, because nothing came of it in the end. And that was all thanks to how quickly the situation was handled. I believe it was when we went out for my mother's birthday. We had dinner at a nice restaurant, and then my brother, partner, and I decided to take her over to Walmart so we could all buy her a nice present. It was easier to take her to pick something out than it was to figure out a surprise gift anyway. While we were there, my brother went off to the aisle with all the Hot Wheels cars in it, since he's an avid collector. My mother, partner, and I went our own way. None of us were really bothered by letting my brother go anywhere on his own. He was 17 at the time. That's not a small kid by any means, nor does he look like a child either. That doesn't take away from the unsettling event that followed because of this, though. My mother and partner were really invested in something in the aisle we were on, but on the next one over, I could hear talking coming from the next aisle. I had assumed my brother was alone, so I decided to go check this out and see if maybe he had run into a friend of his or something. When I rounded the corner, though, I saw him talking to a skeezy-looking old man. Must have been in his 50s at least. He was dressed in a NASCAR shirt and cargo shorts. For some reason, I was instantly put off by him. The conversation he was holding with my brother stopped when I approached down the aisle. I went over to my brother and asked him what he was looking at. He showed me a couple of cars he was planning to buy. I moved down back to where my mother and partner were, and instantly told them we needed to go back to the next aisle over and be with my brother. That creepy-looking man was hovering over him. My mom, being the protective type she was, didn't hesitate at all, nor did my partner. That was helpful because he had quite an imposing figure, which probably helped a lot as we came around the aisle's corner. As we did so, the man instantly backed away from my brother and ran, like flat out sprinted out of the aisle and away from us. We caught him a few more times in the store while shopping. Once again on the way out too. We assumed he must be a trucker or something, since he was headed for the truck stop across the street rather than a car in the lot. It unnerves me to think about what might have been said or done had we not approached when we did, or if my brother had been a bit younger or a bit more naive. According to my brother, the man had come up to him and claimed to be a Lego collector from New York. I don't know the rest of what was said, but he was also definitely creeped out by this guy. So yeah, that's my unsettling story. What's one place you can go to find the weirdest, freakiest creatures in our society? I swear, I've never been to a single Walmart where I didn't see at least one eye-catchingly strange human being. Strange doesn't even begin to cut it though for the story I'm about to tell you. It was the Thursday before Black Friday. My Walmart was open extra late. I was in there around 11 o'clock in the morning or so, looking for a new laptop. By chance, I picked up off the shelf the last one that was being promoted for a really good Black Friday deal. As I grabbed it, some big, revolting, dirty-looking guy came up to me and insisted he needed this laptop very badly. I nervously told him I was sorry. It was the last one, and I'd gotten there first. He got very angry at me and started making a bit of a scene. The man clearly wasn't normal. My heart started racing, simply because I don't get put in these kinds of situations very often. As others looked on at the commotion ensuing with this big guy, I walked away with the laptop box quickly and went straight to the line. He kept yelling at me as I walked away. It was unbelievable. Some of the other customers in line even tried to laugh with me and make me feel a bit better, saying this guy was clearly a nut. I get home and my family is asleep already. I go outside to sit in my yard by the pool and set up my new laptop for a bit. Then though, the light on the side of my house turned on, the one that activates due to movement. I went to check the side of the house to make sure no one was there. That thing would go off every once in a while because of small animals or something. There was a small patch of woods right next to our home, so animals would often run through on the property, triggering it every now and then. Either way, I'm kind of a big pussy, so I went inside, locked the door, and finished setting up my laptop in the living room instead. All of a sudden, a car alarm started going off outside. I recognized it to be my Cadillac. I looked out the window to confirm this. I ran to get my keys upstairs, then tried pressing the panic button to turn off the alarm. It didn't work from inside, so I stepped out onto the porch and clicked it off. Then though, I noticed a car parked in front of our house that wasn't there earlier when I'd gotten home. Any cars parked in this area of the street on our block was suspicious enough already. We lived in a closed-off community, and everyone had huge driveways. I stepped down from the stoop and realized there was someone sitting in that car. I went back inside and locked the door behind me. I went to my mom's room and told her I thought someone was outside, meaning us harm. My mom and dad have a complicated situation, so my dad doesn't always stay with us. This may have been a different story had my dad been there to tell him about this. My mom came downstairs with me, noticeably worried based on what I'd told her. My mom took a look through the peephole in the front door, then gasped and put her hands over her mouth. I looked through it as well and felt ready to throw up when I saw a huge man standing on the other side of the door on our stoop. I whispered to my mom, "I think that man followed me from Walmart." Suddenly, the doorknob started to turn as the man tried to open the door. When it didn't work, he started pounding on it as hard as he could. That's when my mom let out a gasp and a cry, and my younger sister came out from her room. She also started to panic. The pounding stopped after a while, and there was silence for a bit, other than my mom's voice on the phone with the police. A few minutes went by, my mom still on the line with 911, with police en route. There was a loud bang and crash downstairs in the den. A window had just been shattered. My mom and sister both screamed and cried. I told them to hide while I locked the door to the den. I waited down there, expecting an attempt at forcing open the door, a bang or anything. Nothing came, surprisingly. I heard the police car briefly wail its siren outside my house. It was the quickest response time I'd ever seen. I ran outside to lead them to the den where the broken glass was. There, they found the huge, dirty, and crazy-looking man hiding behind one of our couches. He was arrested at once, and we pressed full charges. All the while, he was screaming profanities and threats at me, obviously not helping his case one bit. Both cops told me the guy seemed mentally unstable and seemed to be on some kind of drugs. They told us to get a good night's rest because he wouldn't be bothering us again. While it may be fun to people watch at Walmart and laugh at some of the goofy things you see, realize you may also find some of the most dangerous people in our society sitting there at your local Walmart. Last year, I lost my dream job. I'm sort of a gearhead. Cars, trucks, bikes, you name it. I'll drool over the engine anytime. So, when the local custom shop I worked for decided to close down abruptly, I was absolutely devastated. The boss man explained that business was not coming in fast enough, and he was moving his operation out to the Florida coast. He said that if I ever wanted to move out there, then there would be a job waiting for me guaranteed. My girlfriend was pregnant at the time though, and I just couldn't afford to pack up and move on such short notice. He was an awesome guy, and I was sad to see him leave Georgia. It wasn't nearly as depressing as the situation I was left in though. Literally no one else in town was looking for workers. It was kind of a small area, and there was not much in the way of industry here to begin with. When I was a kid, there were only 3,000 people living here. Today, though, there's more like 9,000 people calling Rican home. So, like I said, jobs are seriously hard to come by. There was one place that was always hiring though, and it happened to be the one place I really didn't want to work at, the Rican Walmart. The interview was a breeze. I'm pretty sure the store manager just wanted to make sure I wasn't either brain dead or criminally insane before he threw the job offer at me. Sales associate. I can take apart a V8 engine and reassemble the thing with my eyes closed. But I didn't know anything about being a sales associate. By the time they gave me the navy blue waistcoat thing to wear, I was seriously regretting not taking that job offer in Florida. Like I said, it was an utterly depressing feeling, but Christmas was well on its way, so as you can imagine, I had very little choice but to just shut up and power through. I needed to be able to afford Christmas for my family. The last thing I wanted to do was look like a complete bum in front of my pregnant girlfriend. As December rolled around, I started to notice these adverts for a Walmart Santa. You know, the kind older dude who sits in the little grotto so screaming little kids can sit on his lap and whisper what they want for Christmas in his ear. Having to work at Walmart sucked, but it could have been worse. A few months down the line, that could have been me applying for Walmart Santa. We built the little grotto out of painted cardboard, scattered fake snow around, and weaved Christmas lights throughout. I've always been a big kid at heart when it comes to Christmas, so for a little while working at Walmart didn't quite suck so bad. I reminded myself that before long I'd be setting up my own Christmas decorations for my girlfriend and the kid as well. Little thoughts like that helped me get through the day. When the grotto was fully built and December 1st rolled around, it was time to open it up to the public. I was in kind of a good mood. Tired from the early morning starts, but full of Christmas spirit. Georgia isn't exactly a winter wonderland, but that's never stopped me from feeling festive. On my way to the staff locker room that morning, I passed by a very grumpy-looking guy who was wandering up and down the aisles. I greeted him with a very cheery and friendly, "Merry Christmas, sir." It was pretty much mandatory for staff to do that, but I didn't have a problem with it at all. I actually kind of liked it. All he did was scowl at me though. He had the kind of face that looked like he hadn't smiled in decades, like his facial features might crack apart if he even tried to. I simply shrugged off his rudeness. I get some people aren't really into Christmas spirit, and I don't hold it against them at all. You can imagine my surprise though when I stopped by the manager's office a short while later, only to find that same dude being given the old moth-eaten Santa costume. The same guy who looked like he didn't have a festive bone in his body had just been hired to do Santa's job. I think I might have burst out laughing if I wasn't so stunned at Walmart management making such dumb decisions on a daily basis. This was like a masterpiece of bad hiring. When the sour-faced old man left the manager's office without a word of thanks, I gave my boss a look of confusion, as if to say, "This guy? Really?" The store manager replied with something about him being willing to do the job for free. Otherwise, they would have hired someone better suited for the role. He was a volunteer, apparently, doing this out of charity. Elwin was his name, I believe. No wonder the guy was in such a terrible mood all the time. Poor guy's parents gave him a dumbass name. As you can imagine, the guy sucked at his job. He wasn't festive or cheerful. In fact, I'm pretty sure he upset quite a few kids, whose parents soon began to make complaints to the management. Our manager didn't care at all, of course, as long as his costs were brought down. He didn't even care if the fake Santa made kids cry. What really confused me, though, was that this Elwin guy obviously really didn't like kids. In fact, he was so bad at dealing with them, I wondered if he hated them or something. I wondered if he even had any of his own. Why would someone want to be a Walmart Santa if they despise the idea of being around kids all day? Especially doing that for literally no pay. I mean, he had the job for the entire month, too, not just 1 or 2 days. Stranger things have happened though, right? Less than a week before Christmas, the Walmart Santa stopped showing up for his shifts. We panicked at first, since the other fake Santa we'd hired wasn't willing to work any more than he was contracted. In the end, we managed to convince one of the older electrical guys to don the costume and bellow out a few ho-ho-hos. He was actually a dramatic improvement on that Elwin guy. Anyway, a few days later, we found out why Elwin had stopped turning up to work. It seemed like any other normal day as I wandered through the store toward the staff area. When I walked inside, something immediately struck me as wrong, though. A gaggle of staff members were gathered around one of the couches, all reading something off of someone's phone. I mean, maybe that's not unusual in itself, but usually it would be a bunch of people laughing at some viral video or whatever, right? This time, there was no laughter at all. Everyone had this look of horror upon their faces. They were reading a news article. The picture was of a face that we had all seen before. It was Owen's face. Turns out he did have kids, but they had gone missing not long before. When the police questioned him and his family as to the whereabouts of the children, they told them their missing daughters had gone to live in South Carolina. This didn't add up. That led the police to search the family home for any clues regarding the whereabouts of the missing children. That's where they found them buried in the family's back garden, under just a few feet of dirt. Before their lives had ended, each of the children had been beaten and abused, forced to live in a cage in the backyard. News articles went on to describe the unimaginable cruelty that both children were subjected to before they passed away. In the aftermath, the store manager was fired. He was found to have put hundreds of children in danger, all in an effort to save a few dollars around the holidays. It seemed like Elwin Crocker had been trying to use his Santa job as a cover for his crimes. No one could expect someone who volunteered with children to be capable of such horrific acts of sadism. I quit my job at the Rican Walmart not too long after, having saved up enough money to find somewhere temporary to live in Florida while I got my other job back at the custom shop. It wasn't very hard to convince my girlfriend to move after this whole terrible series of events. In fact, she was almost more keen to move than I was. I work at the custom shop now, reunited with my old boss. My girlfriend is due to give birth next month, and I absolutely can't wait. I can't wait to raise my future kid and give them all the things they could possibly dream of, and make sure they never suffer in their life like those poor tortured Crocker kids did. I went shopping earlier this evening with my 2 daughters. One is elementary school aged, while the other is in middle school. We had looked around in the school supplies section for a while, then rounded the corner to see the Halloween candy on display. As we turned the corner, though, a slightly older guy came really close to us. It seemed like he was kind of in a hurry. He almost ran right into us without even looking. He didn't have a cart or any items of his own, it seemed. "Excuse me," I called, then stopped right in front of the candy to let my youngest take a look at the candy pumpkins. The man stopped quickly and started rummaging around the candies right next to my daughter. It appeared he was listening in to our conversation, and he was reacting very strangely as well. When my daughter said she wanted to take a picture of all the candy, he started acting really twitchy. That caught my eye. He looked away very quickly. We moved on to the women's PJ section to look around for a few more minutes. That's when I noticed the same man passing by very close once again. He was turning right toward the shoes with a big bag of candy cradled in his arms. My girls went across the aisle to the boys' clothing section while I finished deciding what to get. When I was catching up with them a couple of minutes later, that guy was winding through the boys' clothes aisle as well, right towards my daughters. He had kind of paused and looked confused or lost as he watched me discuss sizes with my youngest. This is when I started thinking that something was definitely off with this guy. I mentioned to keep an eye on him to my older daughter, and we moved through the Parisian to the girls' clothes once more. I didn't see him again for a few minutes. I figured it was nothing. Then though, like clockwork, he came into that section once more, acting like he was trying to pick out a shirt or something. He still had that big bag of candy that he kept adjusting his grip on. I kept seeing him take quick peeks at my girls. Every time he'd see me watching him, he'd just pretend to go back to being occupied in his shopping. I told my oldest I thought he was following us, and she said she'd noticed the same thing. I made my youngest hop into our cart so I could keep a close eye on both of them. The man walked out of the girls' section, then looped around the Parisian back to the boys' section. He stopped at the opening on the other side, still within line of sight. The man caught my eye again and began twitching uncontrollably, then pulled out his phone and began texting someone. He walked away soon after. By that time, I was now on high alert and possibly getting quite paranoid. I looked around and saw two slightly older-looking men standing around. One was in the electronics section, looking at some sort of half-empty display of something. I swear he glared at me several times, though. Even though there were 3 or 4 racks of clothes as well as a hallway with occasional people passing by in between us, I could feel his gaze upon me. The third guy had wandered into the girls' section and was apparently considering buying the same shirt as the other guy. Every time he noticed I noticed him watching us, he'd wander down to the baby aisles, then come back a couple of minutes later. I realize now, looking back, that if I really suspected something bad, I should have gotten us all the hell out of there right then and there. Clothes shopping for picky preteens isn't fun anyway, and I really wanted to get this over and done with. On top of that, I kept second-guessing myself. Were these other 2 guys really with the first one, or was it just a coincidence? I kept my girls real close to me. After we moved to the women's section, I didn't see any of them again. I stopped having that feeling of creepily being watched. Now it's the middle of the night. I'm pretty freaked out, wondering what could have happened if I hadn't noticed the first guy and just continued to let my daughters wander around. Should I report this? I can't imagine anything would be done just because I noticed some guy watching my daughters in Walmart. Yeah, I'm not really sure how to proceed with all of this. I don't really know if something bad was happening or if it's just me being paranoid. If anybody has any ideas, please feel free to let me know. My name is Leia. I'm 11, and this is one of those stories that happened to me and my mom. The first time happened in 2018 when I was 6 years old. I'll say this right now. Thank goodness I inherited my mom's photographic memory, because otherwise some of this may not make sense at all. I remember it was February 11th, 6 days before my birthday. My mom, grandma, uncle, and I were in the family truck on our way to the local Walmart to get some groceries. My mom wanted to pick out my cake herself, She said if I was good, maybe she'd even give me a toy as an early birthday present. I really wanted this particular doll because I really loved the movie Brave. I told my mom that I'd be really good. She just laughed and said, "I know, Pumpkin. Just remember what Mom said. Don't talk to strangers or go anywhere with them." I nodded. I was a bit of a spunky, wild child. Grandma always called me Little Marita because of how stubborn and wild I was. I always tried to be good for my mom though, so she'd have just a little bit less stress on her. We arrived at Walmart and my uncle got a cart. My mom put me in the toddler seat in front and buckled me in before wheeling it toward the doors. As we walked closer to the entrance doors, I saw two people, a man and a woman. They looked to be in their 20s or so and were just standing by the doorway. They were stopping people and talking to them while they held out these small oranges, asking kids in particular if they'd like to have one. My uncle rolled his eyes and said in a bored tone, "Look at those weirdos, probably begging for money instead of getting a real job. What losers, the whole bunch." My mom replied in a stern tone, "Jack, you don't know that for sure. Maybe they're just trying to be nice. Don't set a bad example for Leia." We entered the store, and about 2 hours later, we had finished our shopping. We checked out. I had my doll and her box right next to me in the seat. Mom took the card and wheeled me outside. I heard a man's voice call out in a kind tone, "Excuse me." I turned around and saw the two people from before coming up to us. Now that they were close up, I saw that they looked very dirty, and something was a bit off as well. Their eyes kind of gave away that they might have some not-so-nice things in mind. The man came up and stopped our cart. I quickly moved my hand away from him. I could see orange peelings on his fingers, and they looked very sticky. The man looked at my mom, then looked at me. "Your daughter's so cute. Can me and my girlfriend pray over her? I want to know that one of God's angels are safe with a loving soul like you." My mom, wise to the fact that something very weird was happening, then said, "No thank you, we have to get home soon." "We have to get to Dad, don't we, honey? Somebody needs to give Dad a big hug and kiss when we see him, don't you think?" "We'll be going now." She turned and started to walk away, but the man jumped out front yet again. "Come on, it'll be a short prayer." He promised he wouldn't do anything else. I saw the woman circling around my mom, though. She looked like she was going to try and grab my mom's purse. That's when I yelled out, "Mom, she's gonna take your purse!" I then saw Uncle Jack running towards us from the truck. He'd gone to unlock it and help Mom get me in along with the groceries. I heard my uncle yell, "Hey, get the hell away from them, you creeps!" The man turned, and Uncle Jack then shoved him away. The woman pulled out a knife and pointed it right at my uncle, who then laughed. "Yeah, go ahead and try it, you bitch. I'll drop you right where you stand." She did try him, and that was a big mistake on her part. Within what seemed like seconds, the blade had been smacked right out of her hand and out of reach. I was in tears, screaming at the man, who looked ready to attack my uncle as well. Somebody else was yelling that the cops were on their way. When they finally arrived, the two were arrested. One of the officers asked if I wanted my doll out of the box so I could hold her to feel safe. He opened up the box for me. He seemed like a really nice guy. He told me that I was like Marita for being so brave, and also for warning my mom about what the man was trying to do. I asked if we could go home and celebrate my birthday now. The officer smiled and gave us the go-ahead. He even called me a little hero and said I could have 2 pieces of cake that night. I earned the second piece. As we drove home, Uncle Jack looking at my mom, he then said, "Yeah, what did I say? You can't trust weirdos like those." He then glanced at me in the rearview mirror and smirked. "I guess I owe you another present for your birthday." So, yeah, that weird couple that wanted to pray over me, I have an amazing idea. How about the two of you never come close to us ever again? Working the night shift at Walmart as a night stock person on the weekends was my second job when I was finishing up college. I needed to pay off my loans, so I had to make money however possible. I didn't deal with customers or anything though. I would just sign for night deliveries, do warehouse work, and stock shelves in the store during the after hours. The typical shift would usually be either 11 to 7 or 12 to 7. On July 9th, 2015, a Thursday night, I still have it locked into my brain. I was midway through my shift in the electronics department. That was when I saw out of the corner of my eye someone walking past the aisle I was working in. This wouldn't usually catch my attention if it weren't for the fact that there were only 2 other workers in the building with me that night, Alvin and Baco. They were both wearing the same staff shirts I was wearing. I would know because we'd all clocked in at the same time. The person I'd seen out of the corner of my eye, though, was wearing nothing but black. Naturally, I walked to the end of the aisle and did a peep around the shelf to check. No one was there, though. I yelled out both Alvin and Baco's names, so when they didn't answer, it made it even stranger. Regardless, I went back to work. I had been holding in my piss for a while, and I told myself I'd go once I finished up this last aisle. Seconds later, though, I heard a huge crash a few aisles down. It actually startled me real bad. I ran over to see what it was. A bicycle had somehow been knocked off its hook. The hook was still fine and in place, though. Seemed like someone would have had to put in some real effort to knock this down like this. I hung it back up and started walking around the aisles, now suspicious as hell. I got to the last aisle toward the back of the store, which was the paper and cleaning aisle. There was this freaky-ass sound that I could only best describe as a laugh. It was sounding like it was coming from literally the next aisle over. Once again, I did a short run back to that aisle and felt my heart drop. I saw a man dressed in all black, waiting by the end of the aisle with his back facing me. His head was turned so I could see only half of his face. Then suddenly he ran, not towards me, but down another nearby aisle. I could hear his footsteps running around. I was faced with a difficult choice of either chasing him down or going to find my 2 coworkers by myself. I chose the latter. All the while, I kept hearing these freakish laughing sounds and footsteps that I honestly felt were circling around me. I found Alvin in the women's department and told them to be on the lookout for someone who wasn't meant to be in the building, dressed in all black. We didn't have walkie-talkies, so I asked him to tell Baco if he ran into him. I excused myself because I couldn't hold it in any longer. I had to go to the bathroom so bad. I ran to the employees-only restroom, which was in the warehouse section of the store. I put a nest of toilet paper on the seat in one of the stalls and sat down. I heard the door to the bathroom open and close soon after. Naturally, with only 3 to 4 people in the building, I called out, "Who's there?" With no answer, I could only assume the worst. I heard that horrific laughing again, and someone stepped into view from in between the crack in the door. Looking right in, they stepped closer until the crack was completely covered and all I could see was their face. They began whispering some unintelligible whispers. The echo from the bathroom made it so much more unsettling. I remembered I had Alvin's phone number saved on my phone, so I got it out and called him at once. I was very loud with what I was saying, telling Alvin to get to the bathroom at once and help me. I stayed on the line with him and watched as the man on the other side of the stall left one more time, then ran out of the bathroom. I told Alvin he needed to hurry. 20 to 30 seconds later, he entered the bathroom as well and said he hadn't seen anyone on his way there. We didn't have any security guys working when the store was closed, so we couldn't even go look at the cameras. I stayed close by Alvin the rest of the night, helping in whatever sections he was working in. Safety in numbers was my message for the night. I texted my boss that night, and when I woke up at 3 p.m. the next day, I read his response. He said all the camera screens returned static footage from the night before. No one went and turned them off as far as he knew. I got chills reading his texts. He believed my story and assumed it was related to the cameras all going dark, but with no video proof of the breaking and entering or trespassing, I don't think there was anything that could be done. It was all above my pay grade. That was the only night shift I've ever had where something truly unexplainable happened to me.